In this video, we're going to begin our discussion with completing the square. Before we do that, let's talk about a perfect square trinomial. This is a trinomial that results from squaring a binomial. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of perfect square trinomials. X plus 4 squared is the same thing as x plus 4 times x plus 4. So when you multiply it out, that gives you x squared plus 8x plus 16. This is a perfect square trinomial. X minus 3 squared, that's the same thing as x minus 3 times x minus 3, which when multiplied is x squared minus 6x plus 9. So the question now becomes, how do I get this constant 9 and this constant 16 to form this perfect square trinomial? Well, let's start with the 16. Okay? I'm going to start with this positive 8, and I'm going to take half of 8, which gives me positive 4. Notice that's in blue. So now I'm going to take this 4 and square it, and I get this 16. Now, let's take a look at this 9. Again, I'm going to start with the negative 6. I'm going to take half of negative 6, which is negative 3. Notice that's what I have here. And then take the negative 3 squared, and that gets me to positive 9. Now, what I would like to do is to determine the value of the constant to create a perfect square trinomial. And then I want to factor this trinomial. So x squared minus 10x. Okay? So again, I'm going to start with this negative 10. And similarly to what I did above, I'm going to take half of negative 10, which is negative 5. Then similarly to what I did afterwards, I'm going to take that value and I'm going to square it, which is 25. So I'm going to put 25 in the blank. Now, how do I factor? Well, you ask yourself what factors of 25 add up to be negative 10. Well, that's negative 5 and negative 5. So that is x minus 5 times x minus 5. Notice it's the same exact factor, so I can rewrite that as x minus 5 squared. And notice where the negative 5 comes from. That is also the very first step that we do here. All right, so let's try another one then with x squared plus 3x. Well, very simple. I'll take half of this 3. Now, I will not write it as a decimal. I'll leave it as a fraction. So that's 3 halves. And now I'm going to take this 3 halves and square it. 3 halves squared, that is 9/4. So I can write 9/4 here. Now, how can I factor this? Well, in the previous example, again, we used the very first step here, negative 5, and notice it was x minus 5 and x minus 5. So I'm going to try the same thing here. Because it's positive 3 halves, I'm going to do x plus 3 halves times x plus 3 halves. Okay, which is the same thing as x plus 3 halves squared. Now, we should probably multiply to make sure that this works. So let's do that now. So notice when we FOIL, our final answer of x squared plus 3x plus 9/4 is exactly the same as what we had originally. All right, so now let's take a look at an example in a more general case. Okay? So now what do I want to do again? I'm going to take half of this b, which again I'll write as a fraction, and then I'm going to square this. So again, I should be able to factor using this very first step. So I should be able to rewrite as x plus b divided by 2 times x plus b over 2. But remember, they're the same. I can write this as x plus b over 2 squared. Now, again, I want to check by multiplying. And notice when I multiply, I get the exact same thing, x squared plus bx plus b squared over 4, that I got originally. This process of determining what the constant is to get a perfect square trinomial is what is called completing the square. All right, so to complete the square of the form x squared plus bx, I'm going to take half of b, which is b over 2, and then I'm going to square the answer from part 1. So that would be b divided by 2 squared. Now, why is this helpful? Well, if you take a look at x squared plus 6x plus 7, I can't factor that. The only factors of 7 are 1 and 7, and when I add them together, I get 8 and not 6. But we can create a perfect square trinomial so that eventually we can solve this problem using the square root property. So let's do that here. Let's solve this equation by completing the square. All right, so I'm going to rewrite this. All right, so I'm going to take half of 6, which is 3, and then I'm going to take that value and square it, which is 9. So I'm going to put 9 here. Now, to balance my equation out, I want to subtract 9. Think about that. 9 minus 9 is 0. I'm balancing my equation here. So now I should be able to factor x squared plus 6x plus 9. Factors of 9 that add up to be 6 are 3 and 3. Since the factors are the same, I'm going to write it as x plus 3 squared. 7 minus 9 is negative 2. Now, the rest of this problem, I can use the square root property to solve. So I'm going to add 2. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Remember, when I take the square root, it is plus or minus the square root of 2. And then I'm going to subtract 3. So my two solutions I'll write here is negative 3 plus the square root of 2 and negative 3 minus the square root of 2. So in the next video, we will discuss or do more examples with completing the square.